All right, Cora, welcome. I'm so excited to get into our juicy conversation today. We always have so much fun together. This is our third time getting to connect in an interview capacity. I've been on your show, you've been on mine, you were on my summit. So, welcome to the Feminine Frequency Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And hello, listeners.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our juicy conversation. We're about to get into some really beautiful conversations around really becoming an expert at yourself and relationship with self. And Cora and I were just going back and forth before we hopped on, and there's so much that we want to talk about today. So let's start, because I know you're a relationship, Cora, and that's primarily what you do, but our relationship with ourselves has so much to do with how we do show up in relationships. So I'd love for you to talk about, for our listeners, like, what does that mean to elevate your relationship with yourself?
Yeah, it really is the foundation of everything. Both relationships with other people and like the way that I think of relationships too, and why I love working in the territory of relationships is that we have relationships with everything, right? Like we have relationship with money, we have relationship with the universe, we have relationship with certain concepts, right? We have relationship with spirituality, we have relationship with
time.
Food. We have relationship with time. Exactly. So, and at the foundation of all of that is our relationship with ourselves. So I love looking at life through the lens of relationships, because it's just, there's something we can understand when we look at a relationship with another person, where like those same dynamics are happening everywhere. We just don't realize it all the time because it's not another human being. So the relationship we have with ourselves, and why I say this is the foundation of everything, is our relationship with ourselves really informs our ability to see with clarity our relationship with other things, or other entities, other humans, other concepts, whatever it is, and to consciously work on those relationships and say, like, is that an intentional relationship? Like, is that an unconscious relationship? Because we're having relationships with things, entities, people, whatever, whether we are aware of it or not. So the way I think of relationship with self, it's our internal world. It's like the landscape of our internal world. What happens when we feel internal dissonance? Like, what do we do with that? Do we go into a shame spiral? Do we go into force? Do we go into black and white thinking, either or thinking? Or in our relationship with ourselves, and then like how we relate to ourselves, do we go into curiosity? Like, it's, where do we go with things? What do we do within ourselves, right? And something I've been talking to my clients a lot about recently is internal avatars, right? These different facets of ourselves, because there are parts of ourselves that might be fighting with other parts of ourselves, internal dissonance, right? So what do we do with that? Do we go in and we try to create some understanding, and we say, okay, your experience matters and your experience matters, and like do some diplomacy there? Or do we separate further, right? Because whatever's happening internally, that's going to inform our ability to show up for a relationship with other people, with concepts, whatever it might be. Because the difference is, when we have a relationship with ourself that is healthy and harmonious, when we come into conflict or disagreement with another person, we have the ability to communicate our needs and to communicate what's going on for us internally, so that they can know, and then they can do the same with us, and then we can resolve and we can move through things together. When we don't have that kind of relationship with ourselves, it's going to impact our relationship with everything externally, because conflict will arise, or disagreement will arise, and we'll go into blame, or we'll go into sabotage, or we'll start doing weird things without knowing why we're doing them, right? It really does all come back to, what do we do with ourselves internally? And for anyone listening who's an entrepreneur or a creator in some sort of way, you know that this relationship with self is so essential for our relationship with our work, our relationship with our creations. When we come up against a roadblock or an obstacle, or, perceived roadblock or obstacle, what are we doing with that? Are we saying to ourselves, oh, you suck. Why, like, God, why can't you do that? Like, what? How are we treating ourselves? Because if we're constantly putting ourselves down, if we're constantly berating ourselves, that's going to be like a relationship with another person. How do we think a relationship with another person is going to be if we're constantly berating them?
Yeah, the way that I think about things is often in terms of energy, and like the frequency that we're putting out into the world when we have this inner dialogue of shame or of guilt or of judgment.
Yeah.
It directly impacts, like you said, our relationship with everything else, including on an energetic level. When our frequency is really low and we're vibrating at this low frequency, we can't really manifest or attract healthy relationships or create really cool things in our lives. We can, but it's either not sustainable, like we can't hold it and keep it, or we just, can't, we don't attract exactly what we want. We kind of attract what we're vibrating at. So I really love this idea of taking a look at, how are we talking to ourselves? How are we being with ourselves? What is our relationship with self, especially in those moments of when things don't quite work out, or when we make a mistake, or when we feel disappointed in something? How is it that we are choosing to respond to that?
Yeah.
And before we hopped on, we talked about this concept of becoming an expert at yourself, becoming an expert in who you are, and really getting to know yourself. And all of the people who are listening to this, they're doing self-discovery work. Like, they're not here listening to the Feminine Frequency podcast if they're not on their journey to really discover themselves. But I'd love to explore this deeper of, what does it mean not only to discover and be aware of yourself, but becoming an expert at yourself? Let's go through some of the different pieces of what that entails.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a few layers or kind of flavors we're bringing into this. One would be like self-discovery. One would be kind of like I don't want to say mastery. That doesn't quite feel right. Expertry isn't a word, but I think you get the gist. Like expertise. There we go. Self-expertise. And the other would be self-creation. And I think that they're all, they all get to play together, and we get to play in the realm of all of them. So when I say self-expertise, for me, that has meant taking the time, and this also has grown my self-esteem a lot, because it's an investment we make into ourselves to take the time, whether we're investing in programs, like investing money, or investing time, investing energy, whatever it is. But it's really been this process that in itself is this huge symbol of self-love, of taking the care and the time and the energy to really be with myself and listen to myself of, what do I actually value? What am I actually drawn to? how can I tap into these different frameworks that are available, like human design or the Enneagram or all of these things, to understand myself further and to understand how I make decisions best, and what it means when I'm exhibiting these behaviors, or what it means when I'm feeling this type of way, and also getting familiar with different kinds of self-sabotage so that I can spot them. But it's really this process of learning my nature, like truly learning my nature, and truly learning and learning, discovering, and in part creating what lights me up, and really questioning, and like, do I think this thing about myself? Like, is this part of my self-concept because someone else told me this, or someone else told me I'm like this, or I saw this person and I thought I should be that way? Or is this coming from that internal locus of control, that internal locus of power of like, I really feel drawn to this. Like, I really value this. And what I find too is like, the more we become an expert in ourselves, and the more we discover and anchor into what's truly important to us, and also allow the space for that to shift and grow and change, the easier it is to understand other people as well. Because we can appreciate when there's dissonance or there's disagreement, we can appreciate, oh, maybe let me get curious about what it is that it seems like they value, what it seems like their incentives are. And not just what it seems like, let me ask them. Let me ask them, right? I find that taking this time with ourselves to really to build out this personal expertise of self, for me, has grown my appreciation for other people, and my ability to empathize with other people, and my ability to relate to other people, because I can understand better that they may not be like me. They may value different things, and also that that's okay. And just because they value this and I value that doesn't necessarily mean that my way is more important or inherently more valuable, simply that it's more valuable to me. And then giving them the space to allow, you know, whatever is true and valuable for them to be valuable for them. And then also coming from that anchored place of like, oh, well, there's misalignment there, or like, oh, there actually is a lot of alignment. And here's where, in order for us to be in relationship with each other, we just need to appreciate these differences that we have and see them and be able to see them. So for me, it's really been this process that has grown my self-esteem a lot. And it's truly, it's intimacy with self. It truly is. That's what it is. It's intimacy with self. And I love this expression, or this saying, and I find a lot of truth in it, that we can meet other people as deeply as we've met ourselves. And how it feels so poignant too, because it's like, we've been through everything with ourselves. At the end of the day, as connected as we all are in so many ways, you're the only one who's doing life with you every step of the way. And to invest in that relationship, it makes life a lot more fun. So yeah, that's what it means to me, that self-expertise. It's intimacy with self and everything that goes into that.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I know that this has been a journey and a process for you to get to this place where you are at intimacy with yourself, and we can always go deeper. I'm curious to know, on your journey and in your story, before you started cultivating this self-awareness and this self-mastery and this self-expertise, what was your relationship with yourself like?
Yeah. I used to have, I would say from the outside, from the outside, it probably always looked like I was very confident. I was a very like confident appearing person. And in some ways I was very confident. I had certain kinds of confidence, but I also experienced pretty chronic anxiety for a long time. And I didn't even know it. I didn't know that's what was happening. I was like, this is just my normal state of being. And then I started to kind of put language to it and realize it. But that anxiety that I used to experience, and that it took time and a lot of healing and inner work and therapy and coaching to alleviate and to transition my default state of being from anxiety is normal and like abundance is a visitor to like abundance is default and oh, here's a waft of anxiety coming through, right? Like, hello, friend, right? That was very much a process, and it really where that anxiety was coming from was my fear of looking at things within myself, my fear of, or like the ways that I kind of avoidance patterns of like putting things under the rug, and then like feeling kind of that like there's something that's not right. There's something that's not right. Like I had this like persistent feeling of like, there's something isn't right. I don't know what it is, but it's like something isn't right. And like a lot of fear in my energy field. So really, that's how I used to feel on a very consistent basis. And the process of clearing that has really been this practice of how can I be more and more honest with myself? And we talked about this when you were a guest on my podcast of that resistance we can feel to being honest with ourselves, or when we feel this knowing, but we won't listen to it. And that like the anxiety that it creates, it's like so much of the anxiety that the world experiences is this, we're off course and we're afraid to look at that because that would mean, first of all, the potential shame of realizing we're off course, which is where we brought in shame resilience and being able to move through shame, and why that's such a essential life skill. It can kick up shame because then we're suddenly like, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong. Spiral. I'm wrong. I'm right. And instead of like, oh, I'm so glad I know now that I am not where I want to be. Where would I like to be? Cool. How do I redirect in that direction? So a lot of it for me, and I think probably a lot of people listening can resonate with this too. A lot of it was ways in which I wasn't being totally true to myself, things about myself that I was hiding from myself. And then it started to transition as I, did more internal work and therapy and healing and coaching. It started to become, okay, like I can be honest about these things with myself and maybe even with my coach or my therapist. But then how do I expand into the courage to be that way all the time and be that way openly? Because that is, it's a huge energy drain. And that's also part of why we feel anxiety a lot of the time, is because we're depleted. We're also overstimulated. Or sometimes it's because we're understimulated. And sometimes it's a combination. We're both understimulated and overstimulated. But a lot of it can come from just this depletion of the energy that we drain, the energy that we leak by not being ourselves. Because just thinking of like, okay, if we're in some way we're putting on a front, or we're maybe not putting on a front, but we're not speaking freely, or we're not trusting what's coming through us, or we're on a date or in a conversation and we feel like there's a there's an auditor present that's like, okay, I have this thought, let me run that through this filter of what's acceptable, and then I can say it, right? It's exhausting. I'm also thinking about when I was a teenager, I lived in Latin America in a few different places. And the first place I lived was Chile. And when I got there, I was 15 years old. I didn't speak any Spanish at all. And so I just remember, like, I would sleep all the time when I was there, like especially the first month, because everything I did was going through a filter of translation in my head. So it was like, hear the thing, translate the thing, comprehend the thing, or think I comprehend the thing, figure out what I want to say, figure out how to say the thing, try to say the thing, and also confront the potential shame of saying something dumb because I'm learning the language, and then like have, encourage myself to have the courage to speak even when my grammar might be wrong or whatever the case might be. And then just like sleeping all the time, being constantly exhausted. We do that. It's a very similar process of just like internal, how, like, oh, okay, let me run this through a bunch of filters, and then potential, shame things, and then feeling afraid of saying the wrong thing, and then maybe feeling shame that I said the wrong thing, and then feeling ashamed that I'm not speaking up more because I need to, that's the only way I'm going to be able to learn this. And just like this whole dance that we can do when we're not really fully accepting ourselves and comfortable with ourselves, and to not filter everything that comes through us. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're going to be anxious. Of course. So for me, that really was the journey of when I first started therapy, and then coaching, and then what really pulled me into the coaching world was experiencing firsthand how transformational it was for me of that inner knowing, despite all the chirping birds and the depletion and the exhaustion and everything I described, that like buzzing feeling, still feeling like I can do this. I can do this. And that really being the leading thing, and then learning better and better to coach myself and to, whenever we're learning, whenever we're growing, we always have the option to go into shame when we discover something we didn't know, or someone reflects back to us something that we're doing or a way that we're behaving that we haven't been aware of. And then we're like, oh. It's like that feeling of being at a party and you go to the bathroom and then you realize you've had like a piece of lettuce on your tooth and you're like, right? Like the more that we can learn to like be humorous with ourselves and compassionate, and that's the internal relationship with self. Mm-hmm. That's how we grow. That's how we expand. So yeah, that has been my process and my experience of just like patience, and one by one, like quieting the little birds, and like, oh, chirp, chirp. Okay, that's a pretty little bird song. Shh, right? And like not necessarily killing the birds, just synergizing it more into a like, I'm a cartoon Cinderella and like they help me get dressed in the morning kind of relationship instead of like, there are these like buzzards. Uh-huh. Yeah,
I can so relate to that underlying feeling of anxiety, of just like being disconnected from your truth, or not following your truth, or not speaking your truth. And that current that under is so depleting. It really is. And it drains so much of our energy. And to be able to go through the process of first having the awareness around it, and then working through, like you said, the shame, without it being meaning there's something wrong with you for having those thoughts, or meaning that you're never going to be able to change these thoughts. And you mentioned something really important around, a lot of times we have a hard time being honest with ourselves because we're afraid it means that we're going to have to change.
Yes.
We're going to have to do something different. We're going to have to release a relationship. We're going to have to change our jobs. We're going to have to change who we're friends with. We're going to have to change something. There's this fear of releasing, of change, of becoming someone new, and also living in that place of anxiety and that place of not being in your truth eventually becomes more painful than the idea of, oh my God, what if I have to change something?
Yes.
It shifts eventually because that voice gets louder and louder, that anxiety gets louder and louder, to where we get to that place where we're like, oh, I'm really out of alignment with myself. I'm so far off from my own soul trajectory in a lot of ways. And the universe forces you to come back to yourself eventually through that anxiety, through the depression, through whatever circumstances come up for you that require you to come back home to yourself. So I love this conversation around, just being able to recognize your patterns, being able to recognize what's going on internally, and being really gentle with yourself along the way. I would love to talk more about, this piece around shame and resilience when we do notice that there are things that we're doing that maybe aren't working for us or are no longer working for us. Maybe they worked for us in the past and they're not working for us now. Let's talk about this piece around when shame does come up. How do we move through that?
Yeah. And I think another huge piece of this as well is that a lot of times we avoid knowing what we actually know, or we avoid acknowledging that we know what we actually know, because we don't yet know what to do about it. So we can think that the moment that we know, right, or there's this kind of gap or this, process where it's okay, acknowledge the knowing, and then the freak out monster can come in and be like, oh my God, okay, we have to do something about this right away. And we don't always know what to do right away. We can, and that's where the gentleness and some of the patience can come in. It's it's safe to acknowledge that something is off without having to know exactly what to do about it right now, right? That's where we get to open up to possibilities and get and open up to, okay, what would that look like? And expand into that instead of feeling that or kind of compounding the not acknowledging the knowingness because we don't know. It's oh, okay, first of all, I didn't even know, then I don't know what to do, and then I'm just sitting here knowing that it's wrong and then not knowing what to do about it, and then the shame can come up. So to your question of what to do with the shame, it's first recognizing that, and I of course learned this from Brene Brown, that the antidote to shame is we breed shame and secrecy. So the thing to do is to shine light on it. And the best way to do that is, first you can do it with yourself of acknowledge it, see it, shine awareness on it. And then bring it to someone you trust. And I also find it helps a lot to call it what it is, because it can feel so much scarier when we're I feel this overwhelming sense of dread and just embarrassment, and we're confused. We're what is it? My skin is crawling, and also the physiological sensations that go along with shame, and just acknowledging that it doesn't mean necessarily what our body is thinking it means. It's we're experiencing a physiological sensation. And for me, that is kind of crawly hot skin, quickened breath, like just like this like wave of like tingliness. That's how I experience shame physically. But to bring it to another person who you trust and to call it what it is, it's like the shame monster becomes kind of like a cute little Stitch creature when you're just like, oh, that's just shame. Oh, it's shame. So calling it what it is. And the more that you familiarize yourself with its nature and its process, the more you can learn, right? And same with fear, a close cousin of shame.
Yeah.
They're friends, right? They hang out sometimes. The more that you can learn the nature of shame and the nature of fear, and it can also help to study it, like do some research around it so that our minds can comprehend it, understand what it feels like in your body when it comes up, so you can be like, oh, that's shame, right? Immediately we feel more agency when we know what's happening, because what like shame can often feel very overwhelming, and we feel overwhelmed, our frontal cortex just like goes offline and we're just like, ah, right? And it like when we can know what is happening, we're like, okay, this is shame. And then we can be like, okay, what do I do? What is my process when shame comes up? Well, okay, I want to shine light on it. So bring some awareness to it. Okay, bring it to someone I trust, name it, call it, like, I see you, shame, right? And then recognize too that I do a lot of EFT. So that helps a lot too, if like the shame feeling comes up and then immediately like, even though I feel blah, 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 I unconditionally love, honor, and accept myself. And like EFT is just such a powerful tool for like physiologically or like releasing energy and like moving the energy of that feeling and calling it what it is. Like, even though I'm feeling ashamed, I unconditionally love, honor, and accept myself. So that's an incredibly powerful tool. So taking yourself through a process that you can develop yourself, like I'm kind of sharing some of my process, but become an expert in yourself, because you know yourself best, and you know what, like maybe there's expressions you can say to yourself that make yourself laugh, or like however you come to be in relationship with this yourself, create your own process of bringing light to it, awareness, calling it by what it is, recognizing the physiological sensations, which brings power back to you, doing what you can, what works for you to move that the physiology through you, the energy through you. For me, EFT is great. Dancing, just shaking is also really powerful, like shaking. I actually used to do this back when I didn't back when I used to have panic attacks that I didn't know were panic attacks. I would do this. I would do this. I would even do this. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing like intuitively, I would be like, and like, I didn't realize it's a self-soothing kind of way to move energy. So you may be doing some of these already, and then you can bring awareness to that and be like, oh, I'm moving energy. That's what I'm doing. And then when you're coming back into a place where you're more centered in yourself, it's looking at where is the portal for growth in this shame. Because shame is behind, there's like the resistance, and then there's the shame. We're resisting something because we don't want to feel the shame around it. But what we're resisting behind that is expansion. So when we realize this and we start to work with this and familiarize ourselves with this process, we can actually get kind of excited about shame, because we're like, oh, okay, this feels terrible right now, but like, I know that on the other side of this, or underneath this, or through this, through processing this, I will be expanding. So recognizing that, like, it's not just shame management. It's like, it's an alchemy. It's an energetic alchemy of like, whoa, this thing that we think we can just, that, you know, we often, in language that we use, or even, you know, the word management, which I find myself using sometimes because it's just kind of the lexicon. And then I like to get curious with myself when I hear myself saying that, because I'm like, management feels so like, let me manage you. Like, let me just like get in line, instead of like shame alchemy or like shame resilience. I like too, because it feels, it brings the power back to you. But it's really like, how can we familiarize ourselves and actually kind of befriend this process of shame? And to be clear, this does not necessarily make it more pleasant. It can, but like, it's still going to come up at different levels in different ways where you're like, God damn, but really anchoring back into, and this is a belief of like, how is this happening for me? How is this coming up for me? How is this actually an invitation to expand into more growth? Like, okay, the last time I felt this and moved through this, here's all the amazing things that I expanded into. Here's all the amazing things that happened. So like, how can I look at this as a portal for growth if I'm able to alchemize this shame into expansion?
Mm. Yeah, it's really cool once you go through this process multiple times with shame, with fear. Once you can start to recognize the pattern, just like you said,
Yeah.
first we can catch it sooner,
Yeah.
we can move through it faster, and we can have this bigger picture perspective of when we zoom out and like, oh, yeah, this feels really hard right now. And I also know on the other side of this is something really amazing because I've experienced it before. But for people who are in a place where I also used to be and you used to be, where it's like we didn't know how to process these emotions, that then they would manifest in panic attacks because we didn't have both the emotional tools or the tools of breathing and tapping and using all these different techniques to
Yeah.
be able to move the energy through. So now, I think for you and for myself, it's really in a place where at first, when you're learning how to navigate through these emotions and these energies, it can feel really challenging. It can feel like it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It can feel really hard, and it still is challenging, but you can
Yeah.
start to move through it faster, which is part of this self expertise, is learning how to really shift when you notice you're in these patterns, or move your energy how you need to move your energy. And so I love this idea. And I think the cool thing is, at least like in my experiences, a lot of people were like, oh, well, I'm getting older, and have all these negative experiences about getting older. And it's like, yeah, but like part of the thing that I love about, getting older, not that I feel old at all at 31, but it's like, I get to know myself more and more and more and more and more. And the way that I respond to life and respond in relationships, and the way that I'm able to cultivate and deepen my relationship with myself now, is because I've had so many years of practice in this
Yeah.
human experience, in this human life. So
Yeah.
this is like a ongoing journey. I love that you brought all three of those pieces of the self, the just like the self-awareness and the self-mastery and the self-expertise, because we're always moving through this dance of getting to know ourselves, peeling off the layers,
Yeah.
continuing to do the deeper work. And I think it's fun.
It's really fun.
This is my favorite stuff.
Me- it's like our pastime. Just our pastime is, alchemizing shame. Absolutely, like for real though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is gratifying, because life becomes easier. Life becomes easier, and when things that feel difficult come up, you're able to move through them with more ease. And like you see that, and you notice that, and it compounds, and it's so gratifying. It's so gratifying. And it's as you said, it's just the deeper level of this self expertise, or this self mastery, where it's, how am I actually beginning to learn the language and be able to read the feedback of my emotions and my physical sensations, and all of these things, where like, when we haven't taken yet the time to to study it. And it, we can resist studying it because it can be extremely unpleasant at first, right? Like we're talking about shame and like the experience, we all know the experience of being in shame. It's like feels terrible, right? So like it takes a lot of courage, especially at first. It takes a lot of courage, but it is so, so, so worth it. And then also, the more you lean into courage, the more that you respect yourself, the more confidence you build, and that gives you even more strength and ability to move through these things. So it really does compound on itself. But to your point too, of like even being able to notice faster, right? Like it's actually kind of fun because you're like, oh, I'm noticing resentment. Okay, last time, like, what am I going to do about it this time? Because the universe is always going to give us opportunities to practice. So the experience of mastery and stepping into greater mastery, and it's fun, right? Thinking about like, if anyone listening has learned to play an instrument or anything like that, like, yeah, there's this period of time where it's, you're like, it sounds bad. And like, oh, my fingers, I don't know how to do this. For some reason, I'm playing the violin. So we're just rolling with that. But then think about how fun it starts to be when you're just like, ooh, I'm even bringing in some vibrato. Like, look at me. Like mastery in itself is a very fun process because it picks up its own momentum.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, I love this concept and I'm so excited that we got to bring it here to our listeners on the feminine frequency. And I know that there are going to be ladies who want to continue learning from you and exploring more about their relationship with self and others. So what do you have coming up? Where can they find you? Fill us in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So definitely come connect with me. I'm very friendly. You can connect with me on Instagram at the Cora Boyd, CoraBoyd. My website is coraboydcoaching.com. And I actually, the week this comes out, my program Turned On starts, which is the inner game of being on your game, where I am going to be teaching a lot of what we've talked about. I also have lots of content on relationships. Flirting is one of my favorites, which Amy and I have had a fun conversation about before. So definitely come check it out. You can read content on my Instagram, my website. I also have a podcast called Pillow Talk Radio. So come connect.
Amazing. Cora is an amazing writer and brilliant mind. And I definitely recommend to follow her over on Instagram and check out her podcast. Thank you for being here today. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.